I am Alex, and today I bring you a story about trust, betrayal, and resilience. What if everything you believed, your marriage, your security, your future, was nothing but a carefully crafted illusion? One moment, life feels stable, predictable. The next, it unravels before your eyes. This is a story of deception at its deepest and the incredible strength it takes to rebuild. Stay with me, because sometimes, losing everything is just the beginning. Blue heart if this story touched your heart, like this video to show your support. Speech balloon comment 1 if you believe family always finds a way back together. Loudspeaker share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Bell don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, real-life stories that touch the soul. Natalie Evans had always believed she had built the perfect life. At 36, she was a senior financial analyst in San Francisco, earning a six-figure salary and living in a beautifully restored Victorian home in Pacific Heights. Her husband, Matthew Carter, was a charming and ambitious entrepreneur who ran a booming tech startup. 7 years into their marriage, Natalie had invested $350,000 of her savings into Matthew's company, trusting his vision and dedication. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn Carter, an esteemed philanthropist in the Bay Area, exuded an air of grace and class. Despite their seemingly warm relationship, Natalie had always sensed a quiet, judgmental distance in Evelyn's gaze. As her 36th birthday approached, Matthew and Evelyn began having hushed conversations, abruptly stopping whenever she entered the room. Still, she convinced herself they were planning a grand birthday surprise. Matthew had secured a reservation at the renowned Azure, an exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant with a 6-month waiting list. Excited, Natalie meticulously prepared for the evening, choosing an elegant sapphire blue dress and her finest jewelry. On the evening of April 15, she arrived at Azure, only to be met with confusion. The hostess checked multiple times but confirmed there was no reservation under Matthew Carter's name. Panic settled in as Natalie tried calling both Matthew and Evelyn, but their phones went straight to voicemail. She spent the next hour frantically checking nearby restaurants, only to realize that no dinner had been planned. In growing distress, she hailed a cab home, her heartbeat pounding with unease. As she arrived at their house, something felt off. The lights, which should have been warm and welcoming, were dark. Fumbling with her keys, she pushed open the door to a nightmare. The house was stripped bare. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, even her personal belongings had vanished. Running to her bedroom, she found the closet doors flung open, her clothes and jewelry missing. On the kitchen counter lay a single pink envelope. With shaking hands, she opened it. "Congratulations on your new life. Oh, and by the way, your bank accounts are empty. Love, Matthew and Evelyn." Her world collapsed. She rushed to check her online banking and was met with a horrifying sight: all her accounts had been drained. The police, however, offered little help. "This falls under a marital dispute," they told her dismissively. But just as she was about to give up, an older female detective, Linda Grant, slipped her a business card. "Go see Vincent Carter. He's the best private investigator in town." Natalie found herself at a dimly lit detective office in downtown San Francisco that evening. Vincent Carter, a sharp-eyed man in his late 50s, listened intently as she recounted every painful detail. "This doesn't smell like just a financial dispute. This looks premeditated." Using security footage, Vincent uncovered the shocking truth: Matthew had been living a double life. He had a wife of 15 years, Rebecca Lawson, and a teenage son, Jason, in an upscale neighborhood in Palo Alto. Even worse, Evelyn had been fully aware and had helped orchestrate the entire scam. Natalie's money had funded Jason's private school tuition and Rebecca's luxurious lifestyle. Determined to fight back, Natalie and her best friend, attorney Rachel Martinez, took the case to the FBI. Bigamy was a federal crime, and the financial fraud was too severe to ignore. In a dramatic sting operation, federal agents arrested Matthew at his office, seizing his assets. Evelyn, caught sipping her morning tea in her grand estate, was also taken into custody. The courtroom drama was intense. Evelyn, in a desperate bid to control the narrative, coldly stated, "Natalie was never one of us. Her money served a higher purpose, Jason's future. Her arrogance, however, was her downfall." With overwhelming evidence of fraud, money laundering, and bigamy, Matthew was sentenced to 8 years in prison, Evelyn to 5, and Rebecca lost everything. A year later, Natalie had rebuilt her life. She founded Evanstone Financial Protection, a firm specializing in helping victims of financial abuse. One day, while shopping at Whole Foods, she reached for an apple at the same time as another woman, Rebecca. Instead of animosity, there was a moment of quiet understanding. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" Natalie asked. That conversation sparked something bigger. Alongside Rachel, they created the New Life Initiative, a support network for women recovering from financial and emotional manipulation. Natalie's new life had truly begun. Standing in her sleek office overlooking the Bay Bridge, she answered a call from a new client. "Evanstone Financial Protection, how can we help?" she said, her voice steady and strong. Natalie sat frozen in the back of the cab as the city lights blurred past the window. Her mind raced, struggling to grasp the impossible reality unfolding before her. No reservation. No birthday dinner. No response from Matthew. No home waiting for her. A sense of foreboding settled deep in her chest. As the taxi approached the familiar Victorian house in Pacific Heights, dread coiled in her stomach like a vice. Something was wrong, very wrong. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she knew. The house was unnaturally dark, no welcoming glow from the chandelier in the foyer, no faint sound of Matthew moving around inside. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers trembling. The lock clicked open too easily. The door swung inward, revealing a sight so impossible, so violating, that the air rushed from her lungs. Everything was gone. The grand leather couch where she and Matthew had spent countless evenings watching movies? Gone. The bookshelves filled with her carefully curated collection of classic literature? Empty. The framed wedding photos that once adorned the walls? Nothing but ghostly white patches where they had hung. The entire house had been stripped clean, as if she had never lived there. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she sprinted toward the bedroom, desperately clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was some sort of cruel joke. But as she threw open the closet doors, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Every article of clothing, every pair of shoes, every piece of jewelry, gone. Her trembling hands yanked open her vanity drawers. Empty. The velvet box that once held her mother's diamond earrings, an heirloom passed down for generations, was missing. A sob clawed its way up her throat. They had taken everything. That was when she saw it. A single pink envelope sat neatly on the marble kitchen counter, its presence so deliberately placed that it sent a fresh wave of dread through her. With shaking fingers, she tore it open. The message inside was simple, cruel, and final. "Congratulations on your new life. Oh, and by the way, your bank accounts are empty too. Love, Matthew and Evelyn." The words blurred as her vision swam with unshed tears. She stumbled back against the counter, gripping the edge to steady herself. This wasn't just theft. This was annihilation. Gasping for breath, she scrambled to her phone, her fingers fumbling as she opened her banking app. $0. Every account, every savings she had meticulously built over the years, had been wiped clean. No. No, no, no. Her voice cracked as she redialed Matthew's number. Straight to voicemail. She tried Evelyn next. Same result. Her knees buckled. A scream built in her chest, but she swallowed it down, pressing a hand against her mouth to stifle the broken sobs. How? How had they done this? The cold, detached response from the police station hours later only deepened the abyss of despair. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is a marital property dispute," the young officer behind the desk told her, barely glancing at her disheveled appearance. Natalie gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay composed. "This isn't a dispute. This is fraud. They drained my accounts. They stole everything I owned." A sigh. A patronizing glance. "Unfortunately, since you were married, the financials are legally intertwined. You'll need to file a civil suit." Rage burned beneath her skin. So that was it. He could destroy her life, and the system would just shrug. She felt utterly alone, until a soft voice broke through the fog of her despair. "I've seen cases like this before." Natalie turned to see an older woman in her late 50s stepping forward. Her no-nonsense demeanor and weathered face spoke of years of experience. She extended a business card. "Detective Linda Grant. If you really want justice, go see this man. Vincent Carter. He's a private investigator. And trust me, you'll need one." That night, Natalie sat in a dimly lit office in downtown San Francisco, staring across the desk at Vincent Carter, a man whose sharp eyes had seen far too much. "Tell me everything," he said, flipping open a leather-bound notebook. So she did. From the moment she met Matthew to the night he vanished. Every detail, every stolen dollar, every lingering doubt that she had ignored. By the time she finished, dawn was creeping over the city skyline. Vincent sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "This isn't just theft, Natalie. This was premeditated." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" Vincent leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. "They didn't just take your money. They took your identity. And I'd bet my career that this was never just about the business investment. This was about getting rid of you." A wave of nausea rolled through her. "But why?" His jaw tightened. "Because you were the outsider. And from the looks of it, they were done pretending otherwise." He slid a thick manila folder across the desk. Inside were surveillance photos. Bank transfers. Names she didn't recognize. And then, one photograph that stole the breath from her lungs. Matthew. Standing on the front porch of a mansion in Palo Alto. His arm draped around a woman's waist. A teenage boy standing beside them. Vincent tapped the photo. "Meet Rebecca Lawson and Jason Carter. Matthew's other family. The one he's had for 15 years. Natalie's entire world crashed down again. Her fingers curled into fists as she stared at the image. The betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, it all merged into one searing fire in her chest. She would not be their victim. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady, cold. "What do we do next?" Vincent's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "We make them pay." Natalie sat motionless in Vincent Carter's dimly lit office, staring at the photograph in front of her. Matthew. Rebecca. Jason. The perfect, happy family he had built behind her back. Her hands clenched the edges of the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. This wasn't just about money. This was a deliberate erasure of her existence. They had stolen from her, humiliated her, and discarded her like she was nothing. But she was not nothing. Taking a slow breath, she met Vincent's calculating gaze. "Where do we start?" He smirked slightly, tapping his pen against the file. "We start with the money. Always follow the money." The next 2 weeks were a blur of revelations. Vincent moved quickly, tracing the path of her stolen fortune with surgical precision. First, he uncovered shell corporations, companies that existed on paper but had no real operations. Money had been funneled through these fake entities before landing in Rebecca's name. A large portion had gone toward tuition for Jason at an elite private school, while another portion had helped fund the purchase of a stunning 5-bedroom mansion in Palo Alto. But the most gut-wrenching detail? The $350,000 that Natalie had poured into what she thought was Matthew's business had never even gone toward development projects. It had been a lie from the beginning. They played the long game, Vincent murmured, flipping through documents. They let you build trust, made you think you were an equal partner, and the moment you weren't useful. They cut me out, Natalie finished, her voice shaking with controlled fury. But what made her blood run cold was Evelyn's involvement. Vincent dug deeper and found emails, bank transfers, even recorded calls linking Evelyn to the scam. She had orchestrated everything. She had been the mastermind behind convincing Matthew to target Natalie, ensuring that her son's other family remained financially secure while eliminating Natalie as soon as she had outlived her usefulness. The final piece of the puzzle landed like a gut punch. Evelyn had been best friends with Rebecca's mother. The two women had conspired together for years, treating Natalie not as a daughter-in-law but as a disposable financial asset. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated, premeditated heist. Natalie's rage burned hot and unforgiving. Natalie knew she couldn't just sit back and let them walk away unscathed. The legal system might have been slow, but there was one thing she could control: the timing of their downfall. Rachel Martinez, her longtime best friend and a ruthless attorney, stepped in. "We need to go federal," she said firmly. "Bigamy is illegal, and the fraud alone is enough to land them behind bars." Vincent leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "We need something airtight. We don't just want them arrested. We want them publicly ruined." And so, the trap was set. On a warm May morning, Matthew arrived at his downtown San Francisco office, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He strolled through the sleek glass doors, greeting employees with the same charming confidence that had once captivated Natalie. He didn't even flinch when a group of suited men approached him. "Mr. Carter, you are under arrest for bigamy, fraud, and financial embezzlement." For a brief moment, true shock flickered across his face. Then, as his wrists were yanked behind his back and the cold metal of handcuffs snapped into place, his expression cracked. All around him, stunned employees froze. Some whispered. Some stared. Some, knowing the truth now, merely watched with satisfaction. His world collapsed in an instant. At the same time, in Palo Alto, Evelyn's arrest was far less dignified. The FBI raided her grand estate while she was enjoying morning tea on the terrace. The moment she saw the agents, she scoffed, her posture still rigid with arrogance. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice cold but controlled. "I've done nothing wrong." But as the charges were listed, conspiracy, money laundering, aiding financial fraud, the color drained from her face. It was over. And in the courtroom weeks later, as evidence was presented, Evelyn made one final mistake. She tried to justify it. "Natalie was never one of us," she said with contempt, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "Her money was put to better use. Jason's future was more important than her existence." The room fell silent. And with that one sentence, she had sealed her own fate. Matthew was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for bigamy, fraud, and financial manipulation. He lost everything: his company, his status, his family. Even Rebecca, who had no idea she had been legally married to a criminal, filed for divorce. Evelyn received 5 years for her involvement in the scheme, her once revered name forever tarnished. Rebecca and Jason were left financially ruined, forced to sell the mansion and start over with nothing. And Natalie? She had built something new. A year later, she stood in her own office, Evanstone Financial Protection, a firm dedicated to helping women like her escape financial abuse. One afternoon, while shopping at Whole Foods, she unexpectedly ran into Rebecca. For a brief moment, they stared at each other. Then, Rebecca, once proud and untouchable, spoke first. "I didn't know." Natalie exhaled. "I know." A long silence stretched between them before Natalie made a decision. Want to grab a coffee? And just like that, something unexpected was born. Not a friendship. Not forgiveness. But an understanding, a chance to turn pain into something meaningful. As she walked into the cafe, the spring sun casting golden light over the Bay Bridge, she realized something. Her real life was just beginning. Natalie sat in her office at Evanstone Financial Protection, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A year had passed since she had last seen Matthew, since she had stood in that courtroom and watched him crumble under the weight of his own deceit. The days of feeling powerless were over. Now, she was the one helping others rebuild, just as she had. The past 12 months had been a whirlwind. Word of her financial consulting firm spread quickly, attracting clients who had faced the same kind of manipulation and financial betrayal she had endured. She had expected the work to be fulfilling, but what she had not expected was the deep sense of purpose it gave her. Each case she took on reminded her of where she had been, and more importantly, how far she had come. That afternoon, as she reviewed case files, her phone buzzed. It was Rachel Martinez, her best friend and attorney, who had been by her side through everything. Got a minute? Rachel's voice was calm but firm, as always. For you, always, Natalie replied, setting her pen down. Meet me at the courthouse. There is something you need to see. Natalie did not ask questions. She trusted Rachel, and if she said it was important, it was. By the time she arrived, the air inside the courthouse was thick with tension. She spotted Rachel standing near a bench, her arms crossed, watching the courtroom doors. What is going on? Natalie asked. Rachel motioned toward the hallway. Rebecca Lawson is testifying against Matthew today. Natalie's stomach clenched. Rebecca. The woman who had unknowingly been living the life Natalie had built, the woman whose son had unknowingly been educated with her stolen money. Their last meeting at the coffee shop had been civil, even strange, but this was unexpected. Why is she testifying? Natalie asked, her voice careful. Rachel exhaled. She filed for divorce. And she has evidence of financial fraud that even we did not find. Natalie felt a flicker of something she could not quite place. Was it satisfaction? Closure? She had spent so long despising Rebecca, but now, for the first time, she saw her in a different light, not as the other woman, but as another victim. They stepped inside just as Rebecca took the stand. She was not the polished, confident woman Natalie had seen in the old photos Vincent had uncovered. She looked tired, but determined. Mrs. Lawson, the prosecutor began, can you confirm that the defendant, Matthew Carter, transferred over $500,000 from your joint accounts without your knowledge? Rebecca straightened. Yes. I discovered it after I hired a forensic accountant. The prosecutor nodded. And can you confirm that you were unaware of his marriage to Natalie Evans? Rebecca's jaw tightened. I had no idea. He told me he was frequently traveling for business. I never questioned it. Natalie felt something shift inside her. She had spent so much time blaming Rebecca, thinking of her as complicit, but in reality, she had been just as deceived. The rest of the testimony unfolded in a blur, bank statements, emails, evidence of financial manipulation that proved Matthew had been running a web of lies far more intricate than anyone had suspected. When the judge finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. Given the severity of these new findings, I am increasing the restitution owed by the defendant. Mr. Carter, you will pay an additional $200,000 to the victims, bringing the total restitution to $1.2 million. Natalie felt her chest tighten. The money was not what mattered. What mattered was the justice in that moment, the proof that Matthew's actions had finally caught up to him. As the courtroom emptied, Rebecca approached Natalie hesitantly. I did not know, she said again, her voice quiet. Natalie studied her, then nodded. I believe you. There was a long silence before Rebecca spoke again. I heard about what you do. Your firm. The women you help. Natalie tilted her head. Yes. Rebecca exhaled. I want to be part of it. Natalie's brows lifted. Of all the things she had expected to hear today, that was not one of them. You want to help? She asked carefully. Rebecca nodded. I do. I spent years living in a lie, and I want to make sure no one else goes through what we did. I have experience in business management. Maybe I can put it to good use. Natalie considered her for a long moment. There was still a part of her that resisted the idea, that wanted to hold on to the resentment. But deep down, she knew that forgiveness was not about letting someone else off the hook, it was about setting herself free. Finally, she extended her hand. Welcome to Evanstone Financial Protection. Rebecca shook her hand, and just like that, something that had once seemed impossible happened, they became allies. Months later, Evanstone Financial Protection had grown beyond anything Natalie had imagined. With Rachel handling legal matters and Rebecca bringing in her business expertise, the firm was thriving. They were not just helping women recover stolen finances, they were teaching them how to protect themselves before it happened. One afternoon, as Natalie looked over the latest financial reports, her assistant knocked on the door. You have a visitor, she said. An unusual one. Natalie frowned. Who is it? Her assistant hesitated before answering. Evelyn Carter. Natalie stilled. Of all the people she expected to see walk through her door, Evelyn was at the bottom of the list. Send her in, she said, keeping her voice steady. The door opened, and there stood Evelyn Carter, not the proud, composed woman she once was, but a woman whose world had collapsed around her. She sat across from Natalie, clasping her gloved hands together. I have come to ask for help, she said simply. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Help? Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I lost everything. I have nowhere left to go. You, she swallowed. You help women rebuild their lives. Natalie studied her, waiting for the sharp-edged cruelty she had always known Evelyn for. But there was none. She thought about everything this woman had taken from her, about the years of condescension, about the schemes and manipulations. And then she thought about what she had built, about the women she had saved. She leaned back in her chair. I do help women rebuild their lives, she said. But only the ones who deserve it. Evelyn's face paled, but she nodded once. Without another word, she stood and walked out the door. Natalie exhaled and turned back to her work. She had made her choice. And for the first time in her life, she had all the power. Natalie watched as Evelyn Carter walked out of her office, her once imposing figure now reduced to a shadow of the woman she had been. There was no satisfaction in seeing her defeated, no thrill in knowing that the woman who had orchestrated her downfall was now seeking help. Instead, there was only a quiet understanding. Evelyn had built her world on control and deception, and now, without them, she had nothing left. But Natalie did. She turned back to her desk, her mind already shifting away from the past and toward the future. Evanstone Financial Protection had grown into something far greater than she had ever imagined. What had started as a mission to reclaim her own life had transformed into a beacon of hope for women facing financial abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. Rachel Martinez. Natalie answered immediately. Tell me you have good news. Rachel's voice carried a triumphant edge. Better than good. The court just ruled in your favor. You're getting back every cent Matthew stole. Natalie exhaled, her grip tightening on the phone. Every cent. All of it. $1.2 million, Rachel confirmed. He will have to liquidate everything he has left to pay restitution. And get this, his parole is already under review. There's a high chance he will serve his full sentence. For the first time in a long time, Natalie allowed herself to smile. Not because of the money, but because justice had finally been served. You did it, Nat, Rachel continued, her voice softer now. You won. Natalie stared out of the window, the sunlight reflecting off the glass skyscrapers of San Francisco. It did not feel like a victory dance moment, it felt like peace. Thank you, Rachel, she said sincerely. For everything. You would have done the same for me, Rachel replied. Now, get out of that office and celebrate for once, will you? Natalie laughed. I just might. She ended the call and leaned back in her chair, letting the moment sink in. It was over. The fight was finally over. But she was not the same woman who had walked into that police station a year ago, shaking and broken. She was stronger now. Smarter. Unbreakable. That evening, Natalie decided to take Rachel's advice. She met Rebecca at a small cafe near the waterfront, a place she had never been before. They sat outside, sipping coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning shades of pink and orange. Rebecca was the first to break the silence. So, it's done. Natalie nodded. It's done. A slow breath escaped Rebecca's lips. I still can't believe it. That I lived in that lie for so long. That I let him control everything without ever questioning it. Natalie studied her. We all did, in different ways. But we're here now. Rebecca looked down at her coffee, then back up. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. Natalie shook her head. You don't. You didn't know. But I should have, Rebecca insisted. I should have seen the signs. I should have. You should have trusted the man you married, Natalie finished for her. Just like I did. Rebecca swallowed hard, nodding. There was no need for further explanation. They both understood what it meant to be tricked, used, discarded. But they were no longer those women. So, what now? Rebecca asked, changing the subject. Natalie smiled. I focus on the future. On helping other women before they get trapped like we did. Rebecca hesitated, then said, I want to be part of that. You already are, Natalie reminded her. We are building something real here, something that can actually change lives. Rebecca nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I like the sound of that. The conversation drifted into lighter topics, and for the first time in what felt like years, Natalie found herself laughing without the weight of her past pressing down on her. She was free. 2 months later, Natalie found herself back at the courthouse, but this time, not for herself. She and Rachel were representing a new client, a woman who had come to Evanston Financial Protection desperate for help. The case was eerily similar to Natalie's own, and as she sat in the courtroom, listening to the defense attempt to discredit the victim, she felt a surge of determination. When it was her turn to speak, she stood tall, unwavering. This is not just about money, Natalie said, her voice steady. This is about power. About taking advantage of trust. About controlling someone's life through financial means until they feel like they have no way out. She glanced toward the opposing counsel, then back to the judge. But there is always a way out, she finished. And we are here to make sure she finds it. The judge nodded, taking notes. But Natalie already knew, they were going to win. Because she had been in that chair before. She had lived that nightmare. And now, she was the one fighting back. That evening, as she walked along the waterfront, she let herself take in the quiet beauty of the moment. The past no longer haunted her. The fear no longer gripped her chest. She was no longer a woman left behind. She was a woman moving forward. As she stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, her phone buzzed with a new email. A client request. She opened it, reading the message carefully. Another woman, trapped in a situation too familiar to ignore, asking for help. Natalie smiled to herself. She was ready. Natalie sat in her office, the soft hum of the city filtering through the glass windows. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the desk where her latest case file lay open. Another woman. Another story of betrayal and financial devastation. But this time, the woman was not alone. For the first time in a long time, Natalie felt something deep within her settle. The fight she had started a year ago was no longer just about reclaiming what was taken from her. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what she did. She closed the file and leaned back, letting the silence fill the space around her. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Rebecca stepped in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Late night?" she asked, placing one in front of Natalie. "Looks like it," Natalie said, accepting the cup with a small smile. Rebecca sat across from her, studying her. "You ever think about what comes next?" Natalie took a slow sip. "This is what comes next," she said simply. "This. Helping women take back their lives. Making sure men like Matthew can't do what he did to me, to us, to anyone ever again." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I get that. But what about you? Personally? You have spent so much time fighting for others. When do you start living for yourself again?" The question hung in the air. Natalie did not answer right away. It was not that she had not thought about it. She had. But the idea of a life beyond survival, beyond rebuilding, beyond justice still felt unfamiliar. "Maybe I don't know how to do that yet," she admitted. Rebecca smirked. "Well, you better figure it out, because you deserve more than just fighting battles for other people." Natalie sighed, shaking her head. "You sound like Rachel." "That's because Rachel is right," Rebecca pointed out. "You won, Natalie. It is time to start acting like it." For a moment, Natalie sat there, letting the words sink in. Then, a slow smile spread across her face. "Okay," she said, setting her coffee down. "How do I start?" Rebecca grinned. "How about we start small? Dinner. Tonight. No work talk. Just good food and a chance to enjoy everything we have built." Natalie hesitated. But then she thought about all the nights she had spent locked in the past, chasing justice, fighting ghosts. Maybe it was time to start living again. "All right," she said finally. "Dinner it is." Later that evening, as she walked along the waterfront toward the restaurant, the crisp night air felt different, lighter. She was not running anymore. Not chasing something lost. She was just here. Present. Moving forward. As she reached the restaurant, she saw Rebecca and Rachel waiting at an outdoor table, laughing about something. They waved her over, and for the first time in a long time, Natalie felt like she belonged. She had spent so much time thinking her life had been stolen. That she had to reclaim it piece by piece. But maybe, just maybe, her life had only just begun. As she took her seat, a warmth spread through her chest. Not just from the company, not just from the laughter, but from something deeper. Hope. And for the first time, she let it in. Natalie had lost everything, except her strength to rebuild. Betrayal did not define her, resilience did. She had learned that true power is not in what we lose, but in how we rise. As she stepped forward, she knew, new beginnings are always possible.